Le festival d'un pays qui a une si prestigieuse tradition littéraire.
Un monólogo interior no es sencillo de hacer una película.
Sonaba su jazz clásico disolviendo las gafas.
Shall not be thinking so far.
I wrote this essay, which is 59 facts about Albertine.
Filbita para mí es una exquisitez.
Comparte saberes para los chicos y para los grandes.
Podemos expresar lo que queremos.
Mi cuerpo argentino pretende ser irónico.
El escritor lo es siempre de la literatura que falta.
Hay una cuestión geográfica en la circulación de la literatura, una cuestión de mapas y fronteras, ciertas rutas que lleva tiempo recorrer.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Buenas noches, bienvenidos y bienvenidas a esta que es casi la última actividad del último encuentro de este Filba Online 2020. Alguna vez dijimos en Filba que cuando uno está protagonizando el comienzo de una serie es imposible saber si eso es el comienzo de una serie o simplemente un evento único y singular que no se repetirá. Eso nos pasó estos 9 días de festival virtual. ¿Será el primero de una serie o será un evento único y el año que viene volveremos a encontrarnos en las salas y en los pasillos y en los auditorios en donde nos cruzábamos escritores, escritoras, autores, lectores, artistas? No lo sabemos. Lo que sabemos es que este año tuvimos que transformarnos y la transformación atravesó los 9 días del festival como tema y como experiencia. Sabemos que estos 9 días pudimos festejar a través de las pantallas los 10 años de Filbita, nuestro festival dedicado a la literatura infantil y juvenil. También sabemos que la literatura puede traspasar las pantallas y llegar a experiencias y a casas de distintas partes del mundo. Y también sabemos que la virtualidad permitió que escritoras y escritoras a los que tal vez era difícil convencer de que viajaran hasta el fin del mundo, Buenos Aires, donde estamos ahora, pudieran acercarse a través de la virtualidad. Así convencimos a Joyce Carol Oates para que estuviera con nosotros hace 9 días, el primer día, en la primera actividad del festival. Y así en este cierre contamos con la enorme Vivian Gornick. Vivian Gornick, además de ser una escritora que admiramos muchísimo, es una importantísima activista feminista, fue una de las voces principales de la segunda ola feminista en Estados Unidos en la década del 70 y en los últimos 50 años no paró de abrir cabezas, abrir ojos, interpelarnos y ayudarnos a pensar en nuestro lugar en el mundo. Algunos de sus libros traducidos al español, todos por editorial Sexto Piso, son Apegos, feroces, La mujer singular y la ciudad y Mirarse de frente. Cuando Tamara Tenembaun nació, Vivian Gornick tenía más de 50 años y esas diferencias generacionales se disuelven en un instante cuando ellas dos empiezan a hablar y se encuentran en universos muy similares. Tamara Tenembaun es periodista, es poeta, es escritora. Algunos de sus libros son El fin del amor y Nadie vive cerca de nadie. Queremos agradecer especialmente a la Embajada de Estados Unidos, quien colaboró y ayudó para que este diálogo entre Tamara Tenembaun y Vivian Gornick fuera posible. Cuando termine esta conversación les pedimos que se queden un poquito más en la pantalla para disfrutar ahora sí el cierre del festival a cargo de Rafael Sprecherburg en un biodrama performático con 7 traductores profesionales. Queremos agradecer, no hay mucho más que decir salvo gracias y agradecer a todos y todas los que estuvieron del otro lado, a los escritores y a las escritoras, a las instituciones que nos ayudan, nos apoyan, a las embajadas, a las editoriales, a los socios, a los amigos, a las amigas, a todos los que hicieron posible estos 9 días de conversaciones, ideas y palabras circulando. Gracias y los dejamos con Vivian Gornick y Tamara Tenembaun. Buenas noches.
Okay, let's go. So, well, this is a very big honor. I'm a huge fan of your work. I won't say I read everything because your first books are very hard to gather in Buenos Aires, but I read everything else. So, but that is not important. What is important is you have a lot of fans in Argentina. Like,
yes, I hear. Yeah.
All of my friends, like, I'm not kidding. All of my girlfriends have read Fierce Attachments and they have all loved it. So my first question is, does that surprise you? I mean, as a writer who wears New York on her sleeve, I don't think you ever try to be universal, even if you try to be so. But I remember that in the end of Novel of Love, you talk about Willa Cather as a local writer in a complimentary sense. And I was thinking if you consider yourself a local writer, if there is such a thing as a local New York writer.
Definitely. I definitely do. Yes, yes. I think most writers actually consider themselves local in that I don't think anyone ever sets out to speak to the whole world.
Mm-hmm.
Set out to write what you know. You set out to consult your own emotional experience as deeply as you can. And then when Fierce Attachments was published, I was shocked at how many people whose lives are so different from mine fell in love with that book and saw themselves in it. And I considered that a great achievement. And those were the early years of feminists when all of a sudden I was being asked to talk about mothers and daughters. Well, I never thought I was writing about mothers and daughters. I never thought I was
you just
writing
wanted
about
to write one book.
my mother, right, and me as a daughter. So that surprised me. And indeed, when that happens, it's a great thrill. It's a great honor that other people see in your work. Yes, and Willa Cather was a great example, by the way. She was writing at a time when her kind of writing was considered provincial.
Mm.
You know, she was writing at a time when all the great modernists were just beginning. When she was writing, Virginia Woolf was writing, Jean Rhys was writing, Elizabeth, all kinds of very intellectually accomplished women were writing in other parts of the world. And she seemed to just be writing about the American Midwest.
Right.
But if you read her correctly, you feel the depth of what she understood through that local personality of hers.
Yeah, I definitely think so. She writes about a world I've never seen, and I love her too. So,
I'm so glad to hear that. Right.
Yeah.
You read her in Spanish or in English?
In English, I don't. She's been very. I mean, not many of her books have been translated. I think not many.
I would be amazed if they were. Yeah. So you read.
Some have been. Recently, a couple of short stories, a couple of short story collections have been translated, but it's not very common because, well, it's maybe a literature that is very hard to read for people like us who have never been there.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Well, regarding that also, I wanted to discuss Jewish identity with you. Of course, for reasons of your literature. What?
Are you Jewish?
Of course I am. I'm Tamara Tenembaum.
Now we have.
I mean, it's written on my forehead, but.
Your forehead.
So, what I wanted to discuss with you is that I feel that. I feel something that I wanted to know if you feel it, that your role as an insider/outsider, being a Jewish American woman, do you think it shaped your writing And the second question is, do you think Jewish identity being outsider/insider has changed? Because, well, maybe we're not outsiders anymore. I mean, no one talks about Philip Roth as a Jewish American writer. He's just an American writer, right? So that's
no,
what
you've absolutely got it. Definitely. When I was growing up, we were Jewish American writers. In other words, being Jewish was definitely a part of a writer's open writing identity. I mean, but by the time I grew up, that was less and less and less, and now not at all. Now, being Jewish is something that lives inside me. I mean, I am Jewish, and I grew up in a world in which I first learned, I'd have to say, I learned about what it is to be human in Yiddish. I mean, I learned if people are smart or stupid, kind or cruel, everything through that idiom. Yiddish is a very rich language and very idiomatically rich. And my family were experts at it. They were great Yiddishists. And so that lives inside me. That's a subset of, but I would not say at all, when I sit down to write, I think of myself as a Jewish American writer. I think of myself as a woman, as a feminist, long before I think of myself as Jewish. And even though New York is such a Jewish city, and the majority of people I know are Jewish, we almost never, if we refer to ourselves as Jews, it's jokingly, and it's like a joking way of winking at each other. But when I sit down to write, I do not think of myself as Jewish in America. Jewish American writing came out of the fact that once upon a time it was important. I mean, you were writing about being all those men whom you know, Bellow and Roth and all the famous, and you see there are hardly any women among them, which is very important to understand. Because women weren't among anybody, among anything, all the important work was all done by men. So it's the men who put on record what it is to be Jewish in America. Now you have lots of young, there are still many people who consider themselves Jewish American writers. For me, yes, and they are boys and girls alike, men and women alike are writing these novels, but I don't consider them significant.
Right.
They have the same thing in Argentina.
Well, yeah, I think it's different. Well, Buenos Aires is a very Jewish city as well.
Really?
Yeah, it is the biggest community in Latin America, and the very big one. And I think the third one after, it's like New York, Jerusalem, and us.
Oh, no shit.
So it's really big. And but I think most Jewish writers here would say the same thing you just said. They don't consider themselves Jewish. I think it's the same thing. It's a cultural heritage, and it's been mostly lost. I mean, my mother speaks Hebrew, but she doesn't speak Yiddish. So
oh, there you are. Yeah.
My grandparents do, but my mother doesn't. So it's the same way. But I was thinking that even if you don't think about it, there is this way to look at society from a place where you are in it, but you're not. You can pass, in a way that Black people cannot pass.
Right.
But that has shaped your voice and the way you look at the world, right? In a way.
Yes, certainly, absolutely. Yes, of course, that's absolutely true. And more than looking at myself as a Jewish American, I look at myself as a New Yorker more than anything. And New York is like its own country. It's I can't imagine myself having grown up in Ohio or Kansas or even California. I feel so urban, so totally urban a person, and I believe that being Jewish is threaded through that.
you know,
Absolutely.
like, yeah, I mean, Jews don't, I can't imagine a Jew who would feel at home on a farm in America.
Sounds strange. Sounds extremely strange. Jews on farms. Well, we have Jews on farms here. That would be interesting for you. We have there were colonies of Jews that lived in the country.
Yes, 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 yes. We've had that too. They're odd.
But I would be completely lost too. Well, you mentioned feminism, so we can move on to my questions on that. I was thinking, well, you write extensively about what it meant to be part of feminism in the 70s, and well, a sense of community that you felt got lost in the 80s. Do you feel how do you feel about the current wave of feminism? How do you feel about feminism being mainstream, which I think wasn't in a way in the 70s, and in celebrities coming out as feminists and that kind of stuff? Right. And do you think we're building a sense of community like the one you remember from the 70s, or this is a totally different phenomenon this time?
Yeah, not totally different, but it's certainly different. Yeah, we did have what you call community. I mean, we all found each other in order to say and do what we did. Now, what you have is evidence of 40 years of slow socialization to the ideas that the feminists brought into existence. Mm. When the Me Too movement broke out in 2017, I, like everybody of my generation, we were shocked, really shocked at the things that young women were saying, because they were saying everything we said 40 years ago, which meant it took that long for that many people, more people, to become even angrier than we were, if you know what I mean. Yeah. Now, the people of the Me Too generation are not really political the way we were political. They don't have politics, but they are politically awakened, and they are as angry on behalf of everything that has not been accomplished as we were 40 years ago. So actually, a lot of it shocked me. I was shocked at how angry they were, you all were. I was shocked at how incredibly angry they were, more angry than we were. And also, I was shocked at how little had changed, and how much sexual harassment in the workplace was still so much the same. So all that shocked me, but I look upon it now as what you have to see is the slow socialization, the slowly taking in of the anger and the unhappiness over sexism, over women being second-class citizens.
It is interesting that you said something that we discuss here a lot, that maybe this Me Too feminism in America is not political, or not political in the sense that feminism in the 70s was political. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, we became a movement, you know, we became a movement. We set ourselves the tasks of intellectual and emotional explanation. We were more the children of Simone de Beauvoir than the young people today are our children, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I understand.
We continued that intellectual effort. I mean, we wrote books and we went on marches, and we became groups of women teaching themselves about their own bodies and sex and everything. We took on everything. We saw it existentially. We saw our own lives existentially more than specifically, if you know what I mean. Yeah. So we saw our situation as symbolic of the human condition. I mean, you know, in other words, we were a visionary generation, and that gave us politics. I mean, we were like communists or socialists or Marxists. We had our my politics originate in the liberationist movements of the 1980s. Homosexuality, blacks, women. Homosexuals, blacks, and women. These are the movements to which I associate myself. And they were all intensely political, as you know. I mean, I wouldn't say today, all women who are awakened to their situation, they have not made a movement all over again. But they're very important. I mean, what they have shown is actually how far feminism came in terms of changing the sensibility of the world.
No, but I think it's very interesting what you're saying, because I remembered I was thinking about also leaders like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Ilhan Omar.
Yeah,
because they definitely are political, of course, but maybe they more than being symbol of feminism, they're symbols of the new left.
Absolutely. Definitely. They're the result of what we did, and they are what we wanted, that women should become simply part of the mainstream of what's going, of take their place as first-class citizens in the countries in which they live. Absolutely, yeah. That's right. She is. I consider her like my granddaughter.
That's just sweet.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. I'm proud of her, and all the young women who have gone so wildly into politics. It's shocking, and it's terrific.
Sorry, I'll ask a similar question. How do you feel the resurgence of leftist politics relates to the kind of lives that you told in the Romance of American Communism?
Yeah. Oh, yes. How do I feel about it? Well, the left is not the left of previous generations. When people call themselves socialists today, I'm not really sure I know what they mean. I'm not sure what they're after. They're certainly not after a revolution in government or system. What they really are, in my view, is they are dissenters, honest dissenters in American life. They want in. They don't want to make a revolution here. They want the American democracy to fulfill its promise. They want to see a world of equality, and more than anything else, equality economically, socially, culturally, and essentially that is really what people who call themselves socialists are after. And mostly the work that most young people especially do is reform, is work of reform, among the working class, among everything that goes on, and especially among bringing down Donald Trump, and bringing an end to the place to which we have come. That takes a very long conversation, but mostly people on the left work to bring down Donald Trump and to recover some sense of something that approaches equality, which doesn't even get there. But
I was thinking reform was almost a bad word when you were. When reform was almost a bad word for American communists, right? I mean, it wasn't a good thing.
No. But essentially, that's what was happening. Yeah. Yes. When I was a kid, you mean when socialism and communism was much more intense and much more real.
Yeah.
Still, I never, and I've written this, I never looked upon the people among whom I was growing as revolutionary.
Yeah, you said it.
I never did. I saw them always as wanting what we've just been talking about.
Right. So it's just like now we're more honest about it, maybe.
Yeah. Well, clearer. I think so.
Clear.
So. Yeah.
Yeah. That is interesting. Okay, so now that I've mentioned the Romance of American Communism, I wanted to ask you about your writing, because you write different genres. I mean, you write biographies, you write essays, you write memoirs, and I think there is a common thread. There are some common themes and obsessions that always come up. But do you approach these genres differently? Like when you sit to write?
I consider it all nonfiction writing. I see myself as a nonfiction writer. Actually, I see myself more as a writer of what I came to call personal narrative.
Yeah.
I write the personal narrative, and whatever I am doing, whether it's an essay or a memoir or a book review or whatever I'm doing, I see after many years, I am a presence in it. And that's a form of writing which is certainly old, but which has come more and more into its own in these years. So I think of myself essentially as trying to conduct the storyteller in myself, to use myself to tell a story in whatever form I'm using, whatever form I'm working on. That's the best I can tell you.
Okay, so for example, I find it interesting that even when you write biographies of other people, you find a way to get in.
Right in there. Yeah. I try very hard to. I'm very conscious of that. I'm very conscious of how wrong that can go. I've seen many pieces of writing in which the writer is way too present, has inserted herself or himself wrongly in many places. I'm very aware of that, when to use myself and when not. And I hope that works. You know,
yeah, it definitely does. In fact, I found it very funny that in the prologue to the new edition of The Romance of American Communism, you almost destroyed the book, like you you didn't like it.
Yeah, I'm really sorry about that, but I do feel it's a bad book.
I definitely don't. I really enjoyed it, and what I thought it was that I wanted to ask you about this is that even in that book, I think your obsessions about how life works, about how life becomes or doesn't become a narrative or whatever, that's already there. So it's a book that looks.
Yeah.
I mean, it definitely looks like your other books.
Well, that's it. I consider it's like an apprentice. It's a piece of apprentice work. I thought the writing was bad, and so I couldn't let it go. But you know, I wrote a lot worse, and the editors made me stop.
It was worse. Okay. No, it's better. It's great. It's a great book. It's a great book, and I feel the thread that I do think. However, then when you get to Fierce Attachments, there is like a kind of realization of your style. Did you feel that?
Oh, absolutely. I felt that was the end of my apprenticeship in my own eyes. Yeah. Oh, yes, definitely. Yeah. And I worked hard at that. Yeah.
How many years did you work on that?
Oh, between 2.5 to 3 years.
Okay, it's a lot.
Yeah. But normal. It's a normal.
But normal. And you have called yourself a nonfiction writer, which was another question I had, because something that I find interesting is that you write a lot of book reviews, you write a lot about other authors, but you don't seem to write about other nonfiction authors. You write about fiction authors mostly.
A lot. That's very true.
I mean, do you think you feed on fiction to write nonfiction? What's that relationship like?
Yeah. Yes, definitely. Definitely. Yeah. The storytelling, the emotional insight. It's fiction that makes you realize the meaning of a writer diving through a subject for an emotional insight, to make that blossom, to make that, yeah. You know, I think the emotional insight is at the center of every piece of worthy intelligence, even on occasion an economist or a social worker.
Of course. Yeah, it's the center of your work, right? I mean, you write in every book. I think you write about this search for for experience, for lived experience, right?
Yes, to put felt life on the page, which is what a great fiction writer does, makes you feel the life within yourself through what the writer has accomplished. Yeah.
And don't you have any nonfiction masters, even if you don't write about them?
Well, in this new book of mine, Unfinished Business, this book.
Yeah, I just got it.
Oh, well, one of the writers in it is a great essayist who has always been a mentor to me, and that's the Italian writer Natalia Ginsburg. She does in essay writing, in essays, she does what a great fiction writer can do. Yeah. So yes, certainly there are an American writer whose fiction I do not admire, but whose nonfiction I do admire is Joan Didion.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
Her essays are many of them will last as long as American literature lasts. Not, I think, her novels. I mean, I think she's really on the mark in the essays, which is interesting.
So moving on to the city and your love of the city, I was thinking that well, in Fierce Attachments you describe the community you grew up in, and well, you left that kind of community, the idea of women going, well, you left it, and also maybe it doesn't exist. I don't know if it still exists.
It exists, just not it exists among working class people. It exists and lower. It exists among the D-class. It exists among all people who are poor and living in tenements. And
yeah, in a way it still exists, but you left it. And what I think is interesting is that both in Fierce Attachments and in all of your memoirs, I think in many of your essays, you write about the kind of community that goes on in the city, which is not exactly a community. I mean, how would you describe what happens, the kind of sociability that goes on in the city, and well, why do you prefer it, or why do you choose it?
It's the density of human life that makes the city, and New York especially, more probably than almost any other world capital. It's the way in which people act out on the street that is so moving and thrilling. And what the city is a crowd of people who all feel alone, but in the city that aloneness gets transformed into something shared. People act out in New York and so brilliantly and act out so many different moods and so many different situations and so many different ways of trying to remain human in a world that steadily is trying to stop them from being human. Yeah. So it's the city, in the city we all recognize this without knowing it. We all recognize this in each other. If, three people run into each other on a street in New York and they have a certain kind of conversation, at the heart of it is the recognition that three separate people are recognizing the humanity of each other. And, I mean, that happens everywhere in the world that you're in a big city. And that's been happening for, 150 years, from the time, or more, 200 years, from the time that the cities began to be formed, from the end of the 18th century, for all this time. The crowd has become something that's more and more and more. That's why the world became urban instead of agricultural. The hunger for that, because essentially everyone feels alone in the world, right? No matter why. So that's what the city does. And it gives you a charge. I can sit in this apartment all day long and I start to brood and I start to feel lonely, depressed, anxious, whatever the hell it is. I walk out into the street and I'm renewed, I'm revitalized, I feel alive, and lately, by the way, especially since the pandemic, New Yorkers are much kinder. More and more people on the street are definitely kinder.
Really?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
That's interesting.
New York always rises to the crisis. New York has become better in a crisis, not worse.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Yeah. That's probably true in most cities, don't you think?
Yeah, I don't know. Here, crises have been very, very difficult, but I think in the long run, you're right. I think it's hard when you're living through it, but in the long run is when you're exactly right. Even Latin America is very, very special. It's very Latin American cities are special too.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. I'd like to hear.
Inequality is very large in places like Buenos Aires. So I think that plays a big role in the way we deal with crisis. Inequality gets definitely larger, so that has consequences for everybody.
You love Buenos Aires?
Yeah. Yeah, I was born here and lived here all my life. I adore it. It's my. I mean, when you write about New York, I feel the same way about Buenos Aires. That's exactly how I feel. I mean, which is a very strange thing. I mean, not a very strange, but I mean, everybody loves New York. I'm not sure everybody loves Buenos Aires. But I do. So I was thinking two more things about this because, well, I adore cities. This is my favorite topic. I was thinking that you praise the importance of acquaintances, which I found it not the importance, but in your books you always speak of these people who are not exactly friends, but we kind of have them around. You know their names, you know their lives, you see them, and I find it interesting that you seem to treasure that kind of bond. While some people, many people think those bonds are not interesting because they are unreliable, they are impermanent, and you seem to value them in a way that I find very, very interesting. Why do you feel that is?
People on the street? Is that what you're talking about?
Not only people on the street, but when you discuss people who are in your circle, but not exactly your best friends, but they're there. You know?
Yeah. Oh, I see what you mean. Mm-hmm. Why do I? Yeah. Well, if you look every life is filled with a small number of intimates, a large number of acquaintances, and an even larger number of people who exist on the periphery of your imagination, people who are essentially strangers. Like, for instance, if I travel in circles in New York City, that is composed of writers and feminists and this kind and that kind, and most of them I won't know intimately, but I know of them, and that's how a life gets filled in. Every one of those connections brings out something different in me. That's why I treasure them. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful.
You know.
And well, back to the pandemic. Many people are moving out of cities or thinking about it. And also, well, you adore the crowd. I adore the crowd too. I grew up in a little Jewish neighborhood and I moved on to the big city and I loved it, exactly like you. So I have complete empathy with you, but many people are not liking crowds these days.
Oh yeah, no, I know that.
Oh. So what do you think? I mean, New York has survived everything, so has Buenos Aires, but will we get over this?
Oh, of course.
Yeah,
absolutely. Who knows what the shape will be exactly? And you know, in New York, it was exactly the same right after 9/11, and that's 19 years ago. And everyone said the city will never be the same again, and it wasn't true. And it wasn't the same, but it recovered itself. No. Of course the city will recover. What is interesting, I live in a big high-rise in Greenwich Village, but I live on the 16th floor of a big building. About 40% of the people in my building are gone. Yeah, they're gone. They went to their New York is so full of rich people, you don't know a rich until these things happen and you discover how many people have a country house.
Yeah, they have all kinds of houses around the world, right?
They go. So those of us who are left, it's funny, people in the building, we all look at each other and say, where's this one? Where's that one? And then we laugh because we think, we are the starkers, we're the strong ones.
We're the real ones, right?
We're the real New Yorkers. And it's true. There's a little park across the street from my house. And that park has become my meeting place. I meet friends there. Throughout the entire pandemic, there were 3 people I met every single day for an hour or 2 from the very beginning. And we were all neighbors. We're all friends, but we never see each other that much. But we've seen each other almost every day for months, as you can imagine why, you know. And on top of that, there are all kinds of strangers in that park who also have become regulars. You know, they're there all the time. And it gives me a great pleasure to say, and a lot of them are derelicts, homeless, the sub-working class, the drifters in New York. But it gives me a lot of pleasure now to feel I know them all.
So in a way, maybe, I mean, of course, the pandemic is not possible. Yeah, it brings people together, and it also made us recover the streets, right? Because
absolutely.
We weren't in the street that much. I mean, I wasn't.
No, the first few months were really terrible here, really. And when we were at the top of the charts with people dying, I lost 4 people. 4 people I know have died. So that was terrible. You'd walk out on, I live on off 7th Avenue. I live on 12th Street and 7th Avenue. You know, these 2 streets. 7th Avenue is a major, major artery in New York. It is never a moment when there isn't a crowd on the street and lots of traffic. In the first few months, I'd walk out, nothing. Not a person, not a car, nothing. It was like a science fiction movie set. Wow. And that was a big shock, but it was also very interesting. But it was a shock to see what the city could suddenly be, empty of people. It was really frightening. Now, of course, that's all gone. I mean, the crowds are back on the streets. On 7th Avenue, there's 1 million restaurants. They all have tables out on the sidewalk. Do you have that too?
Now, from it started yesterday, literally yesterday. Really? Yeah.
We had it for a couple of weeks, and it's great. It looks beautiful, very colorful, lots of flowers and barriers and plants and stuff. And immediately crowds are sitting in them. I don't know if that's so good, but you see how they were there waiting to come back. They're just waiting to, so the city, however, I still feel like I'm living in a bubble. I feel, I mean, no movies, no theater, no concerts, no crowds, no bars, no restaurants. It's like the absence of social life is so powerful. And it's, I mean, during the day, you know, after we stop talking, you know, I'm working at my desk here, but I'll get up, I'll go out and take a walk. But then in the evening, I'll be home. You know,
yeah, it happens the same way here.
Yeah.
And in The Odd Woman in the City, you walk all the time. So that's your life, right? You walk all the time. Yeah. Have you ever owned a car?
Do I say that again?
Have you ever owned a car?
Do I own a car? No.
You never had a car?
I did at different times, but not for a long time. Most people in New York don't own a car.
No, I think here is the same, yeah. This is a walking city too.
Yeah, and you have lots of public transportation, right?
Yes. Our subway network is definitely not as good as it should be. Definitely not as huge as New York, where you can go use the subway to go everywhere. But yeah, you can get around with public transportation too, all around the city.
You live in the center of the city?
Yes. I live like 40 blocks away from 30 blocks from my childhood neighborhood, which was even more downtown. The Jewish neighborhood is like 20 blocks from downtown.
Oh.
So now I'm 20 blocks away in a sort of hipster Jewish neighborhood. But But I can still walk downtown, which is very important to me. I mean, if I cannot get to downtown on foot, I feel like I'm in the countryside.
Are you a broadcaster or a journalist?
Yeah, I'm a journalist, a writer. I'm not a broadcaster, so the screen is as hard for me as it is for you. I usually write.
What do you write? What sort of things do you write?
Well, nonfiction and fiction. I'll send you my book when it's out in English. I'll definitely try to send it to you.
Good.
So yeah, and I also write about being Jewish. Well, but my background is very different. I was an Orthodox child. It's very different from yours.
You were an Orthodox child?
Yeah.
Oh God.
Luckily I'm out of there. But yeah, it's a different background. I think
There's a television series now called Unorthodox.
Yeah, I watched it. Did you watch it?
Yeah, I did.
Did you like it? Yeah.
It was very impressive.
Yeah, I think, I mean, here we don't have a very big Satmar community. Most Orthodox people here are modern Orthodox. They don't speak Yiddish among themselves. It's not that common.
Yeah, right.
But it was, I mean, like my mother remembered that in the 80s the Satmar community here was much bigger, so she remembered a lot of people that lived like that.
Oh, scary. It's frightening.
Frightening. For me, it's a nightmare. Like the nightmare where they take you back to
the
neighborhood. Yeah, it's a nightmare.
And kidnapping her. Oh,
yeah.
Frightening. Yeah.
Frightening. So I have to ask you a bit more about your books before I'll let you go. I'm extremely sorry. But I wanted to know one other thing. I mean, well, two things, because I have an audience question. So it's one thing, and then I have an audience question that I have to ask you. Like a question that the audience sent for you.
Oh.
Yeah. For your big fans in Argentina. So my first question, my question on your writing is about well, your style has evolved a lot around the years, I think, but there is a fluidity, there is a way of transitioning from one thing to another that is very characteristic of you. Do you work on that? Do you feel that that is there, or it's just something I'm thinking about?
I don't know what you mean exactly.
The way you flow from a topic to another, to a story to another, from a story to another, like in all of your memoirs. Do you work on that, or it's just something that happens when you sit and write?
No, I work on it.
Okay.
I work on it.
You work on everything.
I work on everything. I'm very aware of making large sense of whatever concrete little story I'm telling. Whatever I write about myself or use myself, I feel I can use it only if I'm trying to make some larger sense out of it for the reader, the reader. You know, I taught in creative writing programs for many years, and it's in the course of teaching that I began to teach myself the meaning of exactly this. I would tell the students, your feelings are not a subject. Your feelings are not a subject. And,
that's good.
In other words, if I have a feeling, I have to justify it by making a metaphor out of it. I have to believe in that metaphor. So that is why I work in my own mind from the concrete to the abstract, or the other way.
Not the other way.
No, sometimes
or the other way.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, right. Either way. But they must illustrate each other in order to enlarge the meaning of why you're writing. In other words, if I want my work to be of interest to anybody besides my family and my friends, so I work. Yeah.
And how was it when you wrote about your mother? How did you manage to discern, well, what is interesting to me, and because I love her and know her, and what is interesting to other people?
Well, you know, the title, Fierce Attachments, was very important. I was writing to dramatize those words. I was never in my mind writing about my mother. I was writing about this attachment between us. And so, you know, when the book was published, my sister-in-law said, "Oh, Vivian, you are many different things." And Bessie, I'm my mother, her mother-in-law, Bessie is also many different things that you don't have in this book. And my niece, her daughter, who was about 15 years old then, said, "Ma, it's just about this attachment between them."
Oh, she's so smart.
Ma, that's what it's about.
Oh, that's adorable. That's just adorable. You mentioned your niece, and you reminded me another question I have, and then we move on to the audience. I'm really sorry about this, but I'm a big fan. Just let me have my question. Well, of course, in The Odd Woman and the City, and in every book, but especially in The Odd Woman, you write about being a single woman. I was thinking that what I love about how you write about singlehood is that you embrace it without pretending it has no dark sides, without pretending it has no obscurities, like every other experience in life, right? So, like couplehood, for that matter.
Yeah,
so,
right.
So what I was thinking is, do you think being a single woman has gotten easier since, like, in the last decades, and do you think it still can get easier?
You know, since the pandemic, more people have written about living alone than I ever remember.
Right. Yeah.
That's the truth.
Yeah, it's true here too. Yeah.
Yeah. And here in New York, 50% of all households in New York City are single. 50%. That's unbelievable. And most of them are women. You know, no, I don't think it ever gets any easier. I think living alone is both exciting and painful.
That's beautiful.
And I don't think it gets any easier, but I do think that, for instance, you learn more about it, or you should be able to learn more about it. You should be able to see how you survive it, and even more what it teaches you about yourself. It should be like just the way marriage is. It should be something you use to learn. And God knows, I mean, you know, fiction writing forever and ever is, the heart of it is marriage, is being married. And it isn't too often that you learn much about it from novels. But people are learning all the time, and both to the good and to the bad. If you knew the number of married women that I have known over my life who have envied me.
No, I definitely know many women that envy single women.
Yeah.
But they still choose to be married. So
exactly.
I don't know why.
And when I look at their marriages, I'm glad to be not married.
So who's right?
The important thing is that we should really absorb the experience of whatever it is, alone or not alone, and make something of it. That's the important thing. And if there's anything that might come out of the pandemic, I often think about that. All the young women who are writing now about men too, men too, Many men I know who are living alone, especially gay men, they are climbing the walls now. They don't really know how to do it.
Yeah, with the parties and nightlife, it's my friends are.
Do you live alone?
No, I live with my boyfriend, but we have very independent lives, and I miss that. I mean, we don't have them anymore because where would I go? I mean, we have them, but
right.
Going out at night, I miss the night. I miss the nightlife. I definitely miss Buenos Aires in the dark. Going to a place and not know where you're going to end up, who you're going to end up with. It's the thing I miss the most. I hope I will. So one last question from the audience is that it's from a Peruvian writer I know, so I chose her because she's my friend and the question was good. And she said she heard in an interview, or she read in an interview, that you felt your writing changed a lot when you turned 50. So she wanted to know if you ever felt another like spectacular change or special change. Maybe spectacular is a strong word, but like you ever felt another change like that, and in what context that has happened since?
That's a very good question. I'll have to think about that. Tell her I have to think about that. I'm not sure, but when I'm a little more certain, I'll get in touch with you.
Please do. Okay, go to for your walk.
Okay.
And, it was a big honor to have you here, and it was a pleasure.
And for me too. A pleasure, Tamara. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.